Number 7. Alabama. A state known for warm winters and southern charm, but financial fragility and mounting debt could make a major economic shock hit harder than most. Alabama leads the nation in personal bankruptcies, with more than 520 filings per 100,000 people annually. That high level of consumer debt and financial distress leaves many families one paycheck away from default, which in a downturn could spiral into waves of missed payments. The state also carries heavy public pension obligations, over $24 billion in unfunded liabilities, with plans funded at just around 63% of what they owe. That gap lingers despite efforts to stabilize the system, and it ties up a growing share of the annual budget just in retirement payments, crowding out everything from education to infrastructure to emergency services. Wages in Alabama also lag behind national averages, deepening the squeeze on household budgets and limiting the speed of recovery following any shock. With income subdued and debt burdens high, even modest disruptions, like rising unemployment, health crises, or interest rate spikes, could trigger widespread financial dysfunction. In local governments, the ripple effect is already visible. Tax delinquencies tied to personal debt reduce revenue, forcing municipalities to cut services or push through narrower budgets. Small towns with shrinking populations and limited economic activity face the greatest risk, since even minor revenue shortages can tip budgets into crisis. If a severe recession hit, pushing unemployment higher or triggering a debt panic, Alabama's structural fragility could unfold quickly. The state might see sharp increases in bankruptcies and defaults. The public pension system would demand even more state funding, forcing cuts to critical services or major tax hikes. Local governments could default on bonds or delay essential maintenance projects. Some reforms have been enacted, such as laws requiring pension benefit increases to be pre-funded, but that prevents new problems more than it solves the old ones. The existing $24 billion unfunded liability remains for future taxpayers and will strain budgets for years. Alabama isn't teetering on the edge, but it is more exposed to systemic stress than most. A deep economic contraction would amplify existing weaknesses. With household debt already high, revenue under pressure, and retiree promises looming large, Alabama would likely feel the fiscal squeeze sooner and harder than many other states. Number 6. California. The Golden State, sunlit coastlines, booming tech hubs, and global influence, but under the glamour, a hidden fiscal fissure threatens everything if the economy dives. California carries over $285 billion in unfunded public pension obligations. Big systems like CalPERS and CalSTARS have funded ratios hovering around 70 to 75%, meaning a significant chunk of promised retiree benefits lacks coverage, injecting volatility straight into the state budget. Each year, billions flow from general revenues to close these pension gaps. In 2023, the legislature directed roughly $7 billion to pension shortfalls, and with reforms like Proposition 2, that figure is only set to climb. These payments siphon off funds that could support schools, roads, health programs, and other essential services. To address these strains, the state has shifted gears, raising public employee contributions, limiting benefit increases for new hires, and building a rainy day fund. But many local governments have been slower to follow, and recent political moves threaten to reverse key pension reforms that could easily inflate future liabilities and unravel progress made since the 2012 pension overhaul. On top of pensions, California faces unfunded retiree healthcare and growing post-employment costs. These obligations stretch beyond the state level. Counties and cities also carry heavy burdens tied to older actuarial assumptions and growing retiree debt. When the stock market and tax revenue boom, things look manageable. But in a serious downturn, think recession, tech slowdowns, or investment losses, those pension and retiree health commitments would still need funding. And with lower revenue, California would face harsh choices: raise taxes/services or borrow at higher rates after credit downgrades. It's not a crisis today, but the risk is real. Failure to strengthen pension contributions and rein in legacy costs could trigger a fiscal squeeze. Even slight economic shocks could push California into a cycle of painful cuts and tax hikes, impacting education, transportation, and vulnerable communities. California's future prosperity depends less on sunshine in Silicon Valley than on serious fiscal reforms. Without deeper solutions like adjusting benefits, restructuring funding, or creating backstop mechanisms, the state may find its golden reputation dimmed by economic volatility. The question isn't whether California can weather storms, it's whether it can commit to doing so with its fiscal house in order. Number 5. Kentucky. A state known for bourbon and bluegrass, but deeply burdened by a ticking pension time bomb that could tip it into financial distress in a severe downturn. Kentucky's public pension system is one of the worst funded in the nation, covering over 380,000 active and retired state and county workers. Across its multiple retirement systems, only about 1/3 of promised benefits are backed by assets. In total, the state faces $40 to $60 billion in unfunded liabilities, an amount that exceeds 4 to 6 times the size of its annual general fund budget. Though reforms in recent years have introduced stricter funding requirements and slowed benefit growth, the overall debt remains massive. Pension payments already consume a rapidly growing portion of the state budget, squeezing out priorities like education, infrastructure, and public safety. Beyond pension stress, Kentucky also carries legacy healthcare costs for retirees, not just the direct costs of pension payouts. If investments underperform or take a market hit, the state will be forced to increase pension contributions or slash services to stay solvent. Economic growth in Kentucky remains modest, with wages and revenue barely keeping pace with rising costs. Competing budget demands, school funding, roads, policing can't be easily deferred, and voters are reluctant to tolerate tax increases or benefit cuts. In a deep recession or a prolonged investment slump, Kentucky's structural debt could push it into crisis. State lawmakers might face impossible decisions: reduce benefits, delay payments, hike taxes, or cut essential services. Credit downgrades could follow, driving up borrowing costs and further tightening fiscal flexibility. Municipalities are also exposed. Local governments, reliant on state support and local revenues, could struggle to balance budgets under pressure. Some may halt necessary maintenance, risk bond defaults, or delay public safety and school funding. That's not to say Kentucky is one step from collapse, but its combination of low funding strength, massive obligations, and weak economic buffers places it among the most vulnerable. Although long overdue reforms have slowed the bleeding, they haven't erased past liabilities. Kentucky isn't in bankruptcy now, but it's walking a fiscal razor's edge. A serious economic downturn or investment crisis could force its leaders into a corner where harsh choices await: cut public services, raise taxes, reduce retiree benefits, or risk pushing the state toward a financial emergency. Number 4. Hawaii. Hawaii. Imagine an island paradise. Turquoise waters, tropical breezes, and a relaxed lifestyle, but quietly carrying a massive financial burden that could unravel if a serious downturn hits. Hawaii's public pension system has struggled for years. After being nearly 94% funded in 2000, the ratio fell to around 55% by 2019. Although recent contribution boosts and investment gains have improved stability, pensions remain underfunded and vulnerable to market swings. Retiree healthcare adds another layer of liability. Back in 2013, that system had roughly $18 billion in unfunded healthcare promises to state and local retirees. Combined with pensions, Hawaii's total long-term obligations for public employees and infrastructure projects over the next 30 years exceed $80 billion, more than the state's annual output. Annual contributions now include extra payments to address retiree health costs and pensions, tying up a growing share of general fund revenue. Hundreds of millions are diverted from schools, highways, and social services just to keep promises made decades ago. Reforms passed in 2013 require annual contribution increases and pre-funding of retiree healthcare costs, phasing in over time. But these are long-term pledges that stretch budgets for years, and local governments struggle to keep up, especially when tourist tax revenues dip. Under normal economic conditions, investment returns and visitor spending help balance the budget. But in a recession, investment losses, dropping tourism, and tax shortfalls would collide with fixed pension and healthcare obligations, potentially forcing cuts, tax hikes, or borrowing. Local counties, which often already make partial payments, could default or defer critical infrastructure maintenance. Hawaii could ride out a mild downturn, but its fiscal safety net is thin. Any significant economic shock, like a dip in tourism, military base closures, or market losses, could expose serious structural stress. Spending cuts to education, transit, and community services might follow, eroding the standard of living residents count on. This isn't a crisis ready to explode, but it is a slow-burning fuse. Without deeper reforms such as adjusting benefit levels, restructuring funding, or scaling back retiree health promises, Hawaii faces growing vulnerability. Sustaining its island paradise means more than managing natural beauty. It means managing long-term obligations that threaten to overshadow the aloha spirit. Number 3. Connecticut. A New England state with charming shoreline towns, top-tier universities, and a historically savvy workforce, but burdened by aging obligations that could unravel its finances in a deep recession. Connecticut carries roughly $35 billion in unfunded pension liabilities and another $17 billion in retiree healthcare commitments. Those totals are massive when stacked against its annual income and revenue, hanging like a millstone on each year's budget. In recent years, lawmakers passed fiscal structures known as guardrails. These require setting aside surplus revenue, typically from volatile income and financial tax receipts, into a rainy day reserve or directly to pension funds. Over the past few years, these guardrails have helped pay down roughly $8 billion of obligation and now funnel hundreds of millions annually to prevent debts from growing. But tension is growing. Some legislators want to use surplus money instead to expand early childhood education, social programs, or reduce taxes. Critics warn that overriding the guardrails risks unraveling budget discipline and leaving Connecticut vulnerable to the next downturn. Despite guardrail successes, Connecticut's pensions remain underfunded, hovering around 60 to 65% funded, a weakness compared to many peer states. That means a sizable portion of current cost of living increases, payouts, and retiree health promises are not properly secured. In normal economic years, investment earnings and tax revenues seem to cover the bills. But in earlier cycles, when markets sputtered, the state turned to debt or cut key services to compensate. Without the guardrails, a repeat of that pattern grows more likely. In a severe recession or market crash, Connecticut would face a difficult choice: either raise taxes, cut essential services, or further underfund pensions. Education, healthcare reimbursements, aid to municipalities, and higher education would be most at risk. Borrowing costs could increase if credit ratings fall, amplifying the fiscal squeeze. Municipalities depend on state funding. When the state tightens its belt, local budgets suffer too, affecting schools, police services, and infrastructure maintenance. Connecticut's financial picture today isn't disastrous, but the underlying obligations are stiff, and fiscal tools are fragile. The difference between standing guardrails and overridden ones could determine whether the state weathers future storms or feels their full force. Connecticut has climbed partway back from deep fiscal strain. Guardrails have helped control the damage. But without continued discipline or structural reforms, the next economic downturn could hit hard, testing the state's capacity to protect services and solvency. Number 2. New Jersey. A state known for its suburban communities, strong transportation links, and proximity to major job centers, but saddled with massive fiscal liabilities that could turn a recession into a budget nightmare. New Jersey's public pension promises are enormous. Unfunded obligations total over $180 billion, more than 5 times the size of its annual budget. Major pension systems are only about 30 to 55% funded, covering far less than what's needed to meet future retiree payments. This underfunding didn't happen overnight. Over decades, the state assumed more generous benefits without fully funding them. In 2019, pension plans dropped from being slightly overfunded to critically underfunded, forcing annual contributions to spike. Today, taxpayer dollars funnel heavily into closing these gaps, straining the budget and leaving less for public schools, roads, and healthcare. The state also owes big on retiree healthcare, promises made decades ago that haven't been properly funded. Altogether, pension and healthcare liabilities exceed $200 billion. With only a sliver of that set aside, New Jersey is paying interest on these promises every year, spending money it doesn't have and compounding the problem. In good economic years, tax revenue and investment returns help mask the shortfall, but pension costs are fixed and must be paid no matter what. During a downturn, when markets plunge or revenues dip, the state still owes billions. That puts New Jersey at risk of cutting services, raising taxes, or borrowing at higher rates after credit downgrades. Some reforms have been attempted, reducing benefits for new employees, increasing contributions, and enforcing stricter accounting rules. But these efforts are often weakened by legal challenges or political reversals, and the core debt remains untouched. If a severe recession occurs, the math becomes grim. Without drastic change, pension payments could consume a growing slice of the budget, crowding out essential services, draining investment in infrastructure, and hitting residents with tax increases. Municipalities reliant on state aid would feel the squeeze too. New Jersey isn't facing fiscal collapse today, but it is a state living on borrowed time. Its liabilities are so large that even moderate economic shocks could force hard choices: cancel services, hike taxes, or defer pension payments, any of which would reshape the state's future. Number 1. Illinois. Illinois. It lays claim to one of the largest cities in America, a global airport, and strong industry, but is weighed down by one of the country's worst pension crises. Illinois carries roughly $144 billion in unfunded public pension debt spread across state and local systems. Overall funding hovers around 46%, meaning more than half of promised benefits lack backing. Even with better investment returns, the debt continues to grow year after year. Each year, nearly one-fifth of general fund revenue, about 19%, is automatically redirected toward pension payments. That leaves less room for schools, infrastructure, healthcare, or public safety. Despite attempts to accelerate debt reduction and steady investments, the funding ratio remains stagnant. Generational reforms such as benefit limitations for new hires and higher employee contributions have been overshadowed by legacy costs and added layers of retiree health benefits. In healthy economic periods, rising tax receipts help maintain balance, but Illinois' growth has lagged. Job creation since 2019 barely matches national gains, and state population decline continues as residents seek greener financial pastures elsewhere. If a severe recession hit or investment markets tumbled, revenues would shrink sharply while pension obligations remained fixed. The budget squeeze would force enormous pressure: either dramatically cut services, raise taxes again, or borrow more, potentially at higher rates after a credit downgrade. The 2015-17 budget impasse is a warning. Lawmakers went without a full budget for nearly 800 days, slashing services, delaying bills, and triggering credit downgrades. If that carries a lesson, it's that fiscal strain can spiral when obligations collide with political gridlock. Municipalities feel the ripple effect too. Chicago alone is tied down by local pension plans and post-employment benefits. With state authorities tightening funding, city and local budgets have less flexibility, affecting schools, policing, and infrastructure projects. Some reforms are underway. The state is gradually reducing outstanding debt, and bonds have been issued to cover pension costs. But most of that money is replacing old debt, not shoring up structural liabilities. Illinois isn't facing collapse tomorrow, but its financial foundation is shaky. Big pension promises, aging statutes, and insufficient funding leave it vulnerable. Deep economic shocks or political missteps may leave taxpayers with limited options. In the end, Illinois' challenge isn't the absence of income, it's the presence of massive obligations layered on top. Unless meaningful reforms occur, any future crisis could force dramatic cuts or hikes, changing the way the state lives, works, and grows.